Number 1. Paris Bennett. Dispatch records from Abilene, Texas showed an unusual pattern on the evening of February 4th, 2007. A 911 call came in from a residential address late that evening. The caller, a 13-year-old boy, reported that his sister was not breathing and stated he was performing CPR. Emergency responders noted inconsistencies in the caller's breathing pattern and tone during the recorded transmission. Paris Bennett was 13 years old in early 2007. He lived with his mother, Charity Lee, and his younger half-sister, Ella Bennett, in Abilene. Paris was recognized by teachers and school administrators as academically gifted. Standardized testing had placed his intelligence quotient at 142, well above average range. He maintained steady grades and participated in classroom activities without notable behavioral concerns from faculty. His mother worked evening shifts, and Paris frequently assumed caretaking responsibilities for Ella, who was 4 years old. Family members described Paris as articulate and capable of managing household tasks during his mother's absences. The household appeared stable to neighbors and relatives who had regular contact with the family. On the evening of February 4th, which coincided with the broadcast of a major sporting event, Charity Lee departed for her work shift. A babysitter was hired to watch the children. Paris convinced the babysitter to leave early, stating he was capable of watching his sister. After the babysitter departed, Paris remained alone at the residence with Ella. Late that evening, a 911 call was placed from the residence. The caller identified himself as Paris Bennett and stated that his sister was not breathing. Emergency medical personnel were dispatched to the scene. When first responders arrived, Paris was observed in the room with Ella. The child was transported to a medical facility where she was pronounced deceased. Initial assessment by emergency room staff noted multiple penetrating wounds to the torso area. Law enforcement personnel from the Abilene Police Department initiated an investigation. Paris was interviewed at the residence and later at the police station. During the interview process, Paris provided an account of events that evening. He stated that he had been performing CPR as instructed by the 911 dispatcher, where investigators noted that the timeline provided by Paris did not align with physical evidence collected at the scene. Forensic examination of the residence revealed a kitchen knife that tested positive for biological material. Medical examiners documented 17 separate penetrating injuries to Ella's body. The wounds were determined to be consistent with a blade approximately 6 inches in length. Investigators observed that the positioning and distribution of the wounds suggested sustained and deliberate action, rather than a brief struggle or single incident. Paris was taken into custody and charged with capital murder. Due to his age, the case proceeded through the juvenile justice system in Taylor County. The trial took place in late 2007. Prosecutors presented forensic evidence linking the recovered knife to the victim's injuries. They also introduced portions of Paris's interview statements in which he acknowledged being the only individual present with Ella during the time period when the injuries occurred. Defense attorneys argued that Paris's age and psychological state should be considered as mitigating factors. They requested evaluation by mental health professionals. A court-appointed psychologist conducted assessments and testified regarding Paris's cognitive functioning and psychological profile. The evaluation report indicated characteristics consistent with antisocial personality patterns and an absence of empathy-based emotional responses. The psychologist noted that Paris demonstrated understanding of his actions and their consequences. In November 2007, the juvenile court found Paris responsible for the death of Ella Bennett. New sentencing guidelines for juveniles convicted of capital offenses in Texas allowed for a maximum term of 40 years in a state youth facility. The court imposed the maximum sentence. Paris was initially placed in a juvenile facility and later transferred to adult correctional institutions as he aged. He became eligible for parole consideration in 2027. Multiple documentaries and news features have covered the case, including interviews conducted with Paris while incarcerated and with his mother, Charity Lee. Paris remains in custody as of 2025. The initial 911 call that triggered the emergency response continues to be cited in training materials for dispatch operators as an example of behavioral indicators during crisis communications. Number 2. Zachary Whitman. In October 1998, emergency medical records from New Freedom, Pennsylvania documented an unusual discrepancy. A 13-year-old was reported deceased at a residential property, yet the initial call to authorities had been delayed by several hours after the approximate time of death established by medical examiners. Zachary Whitman lived in New Freedom, a small community in York County, with his parents and his younger brother Gregory. Zachary was a teenager navigating the complexities of adolescence in the late 1990s. He attended local schools and was known to neighbors as a quiet individual who kept primarily to himself. Family members later described the household as experiencing typical sibling dynamics, with occasional disagreements between the brothers over shared spaces, possessions, and parental attention. Zachary had no documented history of significant disciplinary actions at school or involvement with juvenile authorities prior to October 1998. Gregory, who was 13 years old, participated in school activities and maintained friendships within the community. The family resided in a single-family home and appeared to function within normal parameters to those who had casual contact with them. Relatives indicated that both boys had been raised in a structured environment with established rules and expectations. On an afternoon in October 1998, an incident occurred at the Whitman residence. The exact sequence of events remained a central element of subsequent legal proceedings. Gregory sustained injuries that were later determined to be fatal. The weapon involved was identified as a folding penknife. Any emergency services were not contacted immediately following the incident. When authorities were eventually notified and arrived at the residence, Gregory was found deceased. The location of the body and the condition of the scene became key factors in the investigation. Law enforcement from the New Freedom Police Department and York County agencies initiated a death investigation. Zachary was present at the residence when officers arrived. He was separated from other family members and interviewed by investigators. During questioning, Zachary provided an account of what had transpired. The statement included details about an altercation between the brothers that had escalated. Medical examiners conducted an autopsy and documented the nature and location of Gregory's injuries. Each of the findings indicated that the wounds were consistent with the penknife recovered from the scene. Investigators examined the timeline of events and noted the delay between the estimated time of death and the notification of emergency services. This gap in time raised questions about the immediate actions taken following the incident. Forensic analysis of the scene and the physical evidence supported the conclusion that Zachary had been the individual responsible for inflicting the fatal injuries. Witness statements from family members who had been elsewhere in the home or had arrived shortly after the incident provided additional context about the household dynamics that day. Zachary was charged with criminal homicide under Pennsylvania law because he was 15 years old at the time of the offense, or the case was initially processed through the juvenile court system. However, due to the severity of the charge, prosecutors filed a motion to transfer the case to adult criminal court. A hearing was held to determine whether Zachary would be tried as an adult. The court considered factors including Zachary's age, the nature of the offense, his prior record, and the availability of rehabilitative resources within the juvenile system. The judge ruled that the case would proceed in adult court. The trial took place in York County. Prosecutors presented evidence including the autopsy findings, the recovered weapon, and statements made by Zachary during the investigation. They argued that the actions taken by Zachary demonstrated intent and a level of culpability warranting conviction for homicide. SAS defense attorneys presented arguments focused on Zachary's age and psychological state at the time of the incident. They requested consideration of mitigating factors related to adolescent brain development and impulse control. The jury deliberated and returned a verdict finding Zachary guilty of third-degree murder. Under Pennsylvania sentencing guidelines applicable in 1998, juveniles convicted of murder in adult court could receive sentences of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge imposed a sentence of life without parole on Zachary Whitman. He was transferred to a state correctional facility to begin serving his sentence. Zachary remained incarcerated for more than 2 decades. During this time, significant legal developments occurred regarding juvenile sentencing in the United States. In 2012, the Supreme Court ruled in Miller v. Alabama that mandatory life sentences without parole for juvenile offenders violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. This decision required states to consider the individual circumstances of juvenile offenders before imposing life without parole. Pennsylvania subsequently passed legislation allowing juveniles sentenced to life without parole to petition for resentencing. Zachary filed for resentencing under the new guidelines. A hearing was conducted in which his case was reviewed in light of current legal standards and evidence regarding his behavior and rehabilitation during incarceration. In 2019, after serving approximately 21 years, Zachary's sentence was modified and he was granted release. The resentencing process required examination of factors including his age at the time of the offense, his institutional record, and assessments of risk and rehabilitation potential. The original timeline discrepancy that initiated questions during the investigation had been one of many elements that shaped the understanding of events that October day in 1998. Number 3. DeMarcus Coley. On December 24, 2023, emergency dispatch centers in Largo, Florida, received multiple 911 calls from a single residential address within a span of 10 seconds. The pattern was highly irregular, as it suggested simultaneous independent reports of a critical incident from different individuals within the same household. DeMarcus Coley was 14 years old in late 2023. He lived in Largo with his family, which included his mother and his older siblings. when the household consisted of multiple generations, with family members maintaining close proximity and frequent interaction. DeMarcus attended local schools and was described by some who knew him as experiencing challenges typical of adolescence. His older sister, Abrielle Baldwin, was 23 years old and had recently become a mother. She had an 11-month-old daughter who was often present at family gatherings. Abrielle maintained a relationship with her siblings and participated in holiday celebrations with the extended family. DeMarcus also had a 15-year-old brother named Darcus, and the three siblings were part of the same household during the Christmas season of 2023. Family members later indicated that the dynamics between the siblings included typical disputes over personal space, attention, and resources, though nothing had been reported to outside authorities prior to December 2023. Christmas Eve. 2023 fell on a Sunday. The family had gathered at the residence to celebrate the holiday. Gift exchanges were taking place, and family members were present in common areas of the home. During the course of the evening, a disagreement developed between DeMarcus and Darcus. The dispute centered on the distribution of presents and perceived inequities in what each sibling was receiving. The verbal argument escalated in intensity. At some point during the confrontation, DeMarcus retrieved a firearm from within the residence. The weapon was identified as a .40 caliber handgun. DeMarcus made statements directed at his brother Darcus while holding the firearm. Abrielle, who was present and holding her infant daughter in a carrier, attempted to intervene in the situation. The positioning of family members in the room placed Abrielle between DeMarcus and Darcus. A gunshot was discharged from the .40 caliber handgun. The round struck Abrielle in the chest area. She collapsed immediately. Approximately 8 seconds after the first gunshot, a second discharge occurred. Darcus had retrieved a separate firearm, a .45 caliber handgun, and fired at DeMarcus, striking him in the abdominal region. Emergency services arrived at the residence within minutes of the 911 calls. Paramedics found Abrielle unresponsive. The infant in the carrier she had been holding was physically unharmed. Abrielle was transported to a nearby medical facility where she was pronounced deceased. DeMarcus was also transported for treatment of his gunshot wound. When the Largo Police Department secured the scene and began processing evidence, officers recovered both firearms from the residence. Witness statements were obtained from family members who had been present during the incident. Multiple individuals provided accounts of the argument that preceded the shooting and the sequence of events that followed. Investigators documented the layout of the room and the positions of individuals at the time of the gunshots. Forensic examination confirmed that the bullet that struck Abrielle had been fired from the .40 caliber handgun. The timeline of events was reconstructed using witness statements and physical evidence. The rapid succession of the two gunshots, occurring within seconds of each other, became a focal point of the investigation. While DeMarcus survived his injuries and was taken into custody once he was medically cleared, he was charged with first-degree murder in the death of Abrielle Baldwin, child abuse, and delinquent possession of a firearm. Darcus was also arrested and charged with attempted first-degree murder and tampering with physical evidence for his role in the second shooting. Due to their ages, both brothers face potential adjudication as either juveniles or adults, a determination that will be made by the Pinellas County State Attorney's Office based on the severity of the charges and other legal factors. The case has drawn significant attention from local authorities and the community due to the circumstances of the incident and the ages of those involved. DeMarcus remains in custody awaiting trial proceedings. Here, the legal process will involve presentation of forensic evidence linking the .40 caliber handgun to the fatal wound and witness testimony describing the moments leading up to the shooting. The emotional weight of the case extends beyond the courtroom as family members grapple with the loss of Abrielle and the incarceration of two teenage brothers. The infant who had been in Abrielle's arms at the moment of the shooting was uninjured physically, but became a focal point in discussions about the broader impact of the event. The simultaneous 911 calls that initially flagged the incident as unusual had captured the chaos of those seconds when two gunshots fractured a family gathering. As the case continued to proceed through the judicial system, it remained a stark reminder of how quickly familial disputes can escalate into irreversible tragedy. Number 4. Alexandria Duval. On May 29, 2016, motorists traveling along Hana Highway near Haiku, Maui reported witnessing a white Ford Explorer veer off the roadway at a sharp curve. Multiple witnesses independently contacted emergency services describing the same vehicle and approximate location, which initiated a coordinated response from multiple agencies unfamiliar with such witness convergence on that particular stretch of road. Alexandria Duval and her twin sister Anastasia Duval were 37 years old in the spring of 2016. The sisters had been born Allison and Ann Dado and had lived parallel lives that often intersected professionally and personally. Prior to relocating to Hawaii, the twins had operated a successful yoga studio business in Palm Beach County, Florida called Twin Power Yoga. The business had attracted a dedicated clientele, and the sisters marketed themselves as a unified brand, emphasizing their identical appearance and synchronized teaching style. Financial records later revealed that the business encountered difficulties, accumulating substantial debt. The studio closed in 2014, and the sisters subsequently faced legal challenges, including bankruptcy proceedings. After the closure, Alexandria and Anastasia moved to Park City, Utah, for a brief period before relocating to Maui in late 2015. On the island, they lived together and were frequently seen in public as an inseparable pair. Local residents who interacted with the twins described them as energetic and social, though some noted occasional tension in their exchanges. The sisters shared a vehicle and maintained a joint living arrangement in Haiku. May 29, 2016 was a Sunday. Alexandria was driving the white Ford Explorer with Anastasia in the front passenger seat. The vehicle was traveling along Hana Highway, a scenic route known for its narrow passages and sharp curves overlooking steep cliffs. At approximately 11 o'clock in the morning, the SUV approached a hairpin turn near mile marker 14. Multiple witnesses who were driving in the opposite direction or were positioned at vantage points along the highway observed the vehicle. Several of these witnesses later reported seeing the two women inside the SUV engaged in what appeared to be an intense interaction. The vehicle did not navigate the curve. Instead, it continued in a straight trajectory, crossing the opposite lane and traveling over a rock wall barrier. The SUV plunged approximately 200 feet down a cliff face before impacting rocks below. The descent was visible from the highway, and witnesses immediately contacted emergency services. First responders from the Maui Fire Department and emergency medical personnel were dispatched to the location. The steep terrain and the position of the vehicle made access challenging. Rescue teams descended to the crash site using specialized equipment. Anastasia Duval was found deceased in the passenger seat. Alexandria was discovered alive but unconscious and critically injured. She was extracted from the vehicle and airlifted to Maui Memorial Medical Center for emergency treatment. When investigators from the Maui Police Department arrived to document the scene, the SUV was examined for mechanical failures that might explain the vehicle's trajectory. Initial inspection did not reveal brake failure or steering malfunction. Officers interviewed witnesses who had been traveling along Hana Highway at the time of the incident. Several witnesses provided statements indicating they had observed physical interaction between the two occupants of the SUV immediately before it left the roadway. Some described seeing hair pulling and what appeared to be a struggle. The consistency of these independent witness accounts became a significant factor in the investigation. Surveillance footage from a traffic camera positioned earlier along the route was reviewed, though the camera did not capture the actual moment of the crash. Alexandria was arrested while still hospitalized and charged with second-degree murder. Prosecutors in Maui County filed the charge based on witness testimony and the circumstances of the crash. The case was subject to multiple legal delays. Alexandria's defense team argued that the crash was an accident and that any physical interaction observed by witnesses was misinterpreted. Bail was initially set at $3 million, but was later modified. Alexandria was released on bail in 2016 and subsequently failed to appear for a scheduled court hearing. She was apprehended in Albany, New York, and extradited back to Hawaii. The trial commenced in January 2018. Prosecutors presented testimony from eyewitnesses who described the moments before the SUV went over the cliff. They argued that Alexandria had deliberately steered the vehicle off the road during an altercation with her sister. Defense attorneys challenged the reliability of witness observations, noting the brief duration of time in which witnesses could have observed the interior of a moving vehicle. They presented arguments that the crash resulted from a loss of control, possibly exacerbated by the ongoing argument, but not constituting intentional homicide. The defense also introduced evidence regarding the twins' complex relationship, suggesting that while they had conflicts, there was no clear motive for murder. The trial was conducted as a bench trial, meaning a judge rather than a jury determined the verdict. In February 2018, Judge Peter Cahill found Alexandria Duval not guilty of second-degree murder. Following the acquittal, Alexandria was released from custody. She returned to the mainland United States and maintained a low public profile. The case generated significant media coverage due to the twin dynamic and the dramatic nature of the crash. Legal analysts noted that the prosecution's case relied heavily on witness interpretation of events that occurred within seconds, and that the defense successfully introduced reasonable doubt regarding Alexandria's intent. The convergence of multiple witness reports that initially prompted the extensive emergency response had provided the foundation for the criminal investigation. Yet those same accounts were ultimately determined insufficient to establish guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Number 5. Matthew Hurtgen. On February 22, 2025, dispatch systems in Princeton, where New Jersey logged a 911 call at 11:16 in the evening reporting both a fire and a deceased individual at a residential address. When emergency responders arrived at the Michelle Muse apartments, no active fire was detected at the location, yet the caller remained on scene. Matthew Hurtgen was 31 years old in early 2025. He had grown up in Toms River, New Jersey, in a family that included 2 younger brothers. Matthew attended Toms River High School North, where he distinguished himself as a soccer player. His athletic performance earned him a position on the Wesleyan University soccer team in Connecticut, where he played during his undergraduate years. He graduated from Wesleyan in 2014. After completing his degree, Matthew returned to New Jersey and eventually settled in Princeton. His younger brother, Joseph Hurtgen, had followed a similar athletic trajectory. Joseph also excelled at soccer during high school and was recruited to play for the University of Michigan, where he competed from 2016 to 2019. Joseph earned academic All-Big Ten honors 3 times and graduated in 2020 with a degree in business administration. Following graduation, Joseph secured employment as an analyst with Locust Point Capital, an asset management firm based in Red Bank, New Jersey. By 2025, both brothers were living in Princeton. Their family background suggested stability and achievement. Their father held an executive position at a technology firm in Princeton, and the family had relocated from the Jersey Shore area to be closer to the university community. Matthew had limited interaction with law enforcement prior to 2025, with only a drunk driving arrest in 2017 that resulted in a 3-month license suspension. February 22nd was a Saturday. Earlier in the day, Matthew had spent time with his eldest brother, who later described Matthew as appearing extremely distressed and experiencing what he termed terrifying visions. The eldest brother dropped Matthew off at the Michelle Muse apartments around 10 o'clock in the evening. Before departing, he observed Joseph at the residence and sent a text message to Joseph suggesting he contact him immediately if assistance was needed. He also sent a message to Matthew inviting him on a hike the following day and encouraging him to hang in there. Just over an hour later, at 11:16, emergency services received a 911 call from Matthew. The caller reported a fire and a dead body inside the apartment. Your Princeton Police Department officers were dispatched to the Michelle Muse complex, which is located in the Palmer Square area adjacent to the Princeton University campus. When officers arrived, they made contact with Matthew Hurtgen, who was identified as the individual who had placed the 911 call. Inside the residence, officers located Joseph Hurtgen on the dining room floor. He was unresponsive. Emergency medical personnel pronounced him deceased at the scene. Officers observed signs of blunt force trauma to Joseph's head and a large laceration to his chest and abdomen. Injuries to his right eye were also documented, and the eye appeared to be absent from the socket. Near the body, officers noted a cup containing what appeared to be blood, and along with blood-smeared eating utensils and a blood-smeared plate positioned on the dining room table. A knife and a golf club were recovered from the scene. Both items showed evidence of biological material. A cat was also found deceased within the residence, exhibiting signs of burns and blunt force injuries. Matthew had visible abrasions and scratches on his hands when officers made contact with him. During initial interactions, Matthew made a statement to officers indicating he had gone into a fit of madness. He was detained at the scene and transported to Princeton Police Headquarters, Matthew declined to speak with detectives during formal interrogation. The Mercer County Homicide Task Force assumed investigative responsibility in coordination with Princeton Police and New Jersey State Police, and investigators interviewed the eldest Hurtgen brother, who provided context about Matthew's mental health history. He stated that Matthew had suffered from severe mental illness for approximately 5 years. He described Matthew's condition on February 22nd as particularly acute, noting the visions and extreme distress he had witnessed hours before the incident. Investigators also reviewed Matthew's social media accounts. In September of the previous year, Matthew had posted a poem to his Facebook page that included phrases describing knives sharpening and blood oozing from eyes. The poem also contained lines about convulsing and death. This post was made approximately 5 months before the events of February 22nd. A forensic examination of the scene and autopsy procedures were initiated to determine the precise cause and manner of Joseph's death. Matthew Hurtgen was formally charged with first-degree murder. Additional charges included third-degree animal cruelty in connection with the death of the cat, and weapons offenses related to possession of the knife and golf club. The complaint alleged that Matthew purposely or knowingly engaged in conduct that led to the death of his brother and caused the death of the cat located within the residence. Matthew made his first court appearance on February 27, 2025, via video conference before Superior Court Judge Amber Gibbs. His attorney, Jason Mady from the Public Defender's Office, appeared on his behalf. During the hearing, Matthew voluntarily consented to pretrial detention. The judge scheduled the next court appearance for March 24, 2025. Prosecutors indicated their intention to refer the case to a grand jury. At subsequent proceedings, investigators disclosed challenges accessing password-protected electronic devices that had been seized from Matthew at the time of his arrest. The court addressed motions related to unlocking these devices for evidentiary review. As of March 2025, Matthew Hurtgen remains in custody at the Mercer County Correctional Center, awaiting further legal proceedings. If convicted of first-degree murder, he faces a sentence ranging from 30 years to life imprisonment, with a potential fine of up to $200,000. The case continues to proceed through the Mercer County court system, or the 911 call that brought officers to the Michelle Muse apartments remains part of the investigative record. Its report of a fire unexplained by the physical evidence at the scene. Number 6. Benjamin Elliott. Digital forensic analysts in Harris County, Texas, identified an anomaly in cellular device activity records related to a residential address in Katy during the early morning hours of September 29, 2021. Automated tracking systems logged a 24-minute period of device inactivity, followed by resumption of usage, movement between 2 rooms within the residence, and an emergency call placement, creating a data pattern that contradicted the account provided by the device owner. Benjamin Elliott and his twin sister Megan Elliott were 17 years old in the fall of 2021, when the twins lived with their parents in a subdivision near Clay Road and Greenhouse in West Harris County. Their mother, Kathy Elliott, worked as a senior manager with the Girl Scouts of America. Their father, Michael Elliott, maintained the household as a stay-at-home parent. The twins also had an older sister named Elizabeth. Family members and neighbors consistently described Benjamin and Megan as exceptionally close. They shared common interests, maintained similar friend groups, and were frequently observed together in social settings. Friends characterized the relationship as mutually supportive, with Megan often standing beside Benjamin when she felt uncomfortable in situations. Both attended local schools and participated in typical teenage activities. Benjamin had developed an interest in knives, particularly survival knives, and was described by his father as being enamored with such items. The family had documented instances of sleepwalking occurring within the household. A childhood friend recalled an incident at a slumber party years earlier, when Benjamin was discovered eating a donut while asleep on a couch. Family members also noted that Benjamin fell asleep quickly, but experienced difficulty waking and sometimes had no memory of conversations that occurred during these transition periods. The early morning of September 29th, 2021, unfolded during a period when Benjamin had been awake for extended hours. Cell phone records later examined by investigators showed that Benjamin had been using his device throughout the late evening and early morning hours. At some point between 2:30 and 3 o'clock, there was a 24-minute period during which his phone remained inactive. Following this period, the phone's tracking data recorded movement from one room to another within the residence. At approximately 4:42 in the morning, a 911 call was placed from Benjamin's phone. During the call, Benjamin informed the emergency operator that he had stabbed his sister. Audio from the call captured Benjamin stating that he thought it was a dream and expressing distress about the situation. His voice during the call was noted to be at a low volume, described as whispering. Harris County Sheriff's Office deputies were dispatched to the residence on Brown Meadow Court. When deputies arrived, they entered the home and located Benjamin in Megan's bedroom. He was performing chest compressions on his sister. Body camera footage captured the scene and Benjamin's statements to responding officers. He told a deputy that he did not deserve respect because he had killed his sister. Megan was lying on her bed with visible injuries to her neck area. A knife, later identified as one of Michael Elliott's survival knives, was on the ground near the bed. Emergency medical personnel assessed Megan and determined she had sustained fatal injuries. She was pronounced deceased at the scene. Michael Elliott, awakened by the commotion, entered the room and observed his daughter's face appearing gray, while Benjamin continued performing CPR. Benjamin was taken into custody and transported to the Harris County Sheriff's Office for questioning. During an interview with a detective, Benjamin provided an account of the events. He stated that he woke up in Megan's bedroom and saw a knife in her neck. He described the experience as feeling like a realistic nightmare until he fully realized he was standing above her bed. He told the detective that he removed the knife, turned on the bedroom light, and placed a pillow on her neck to apply pressure to the wound. He then retrieved his phone from his room and called 911. Benjamin told investigators that stabbing his sister did not align with anything he believed in, and that he and Megan were best friends. He acknowledged having been told by his sister on one prior occasion that she had observed him sleepwalking. Medical examiners conducted an autopsy on Megan Elliott. The examination revealed that she had sustained 2 separate stab wounds to her neck region. One wound measured approximately 4 inches in depth and had severed major arteries, including the carotid artery and jugular vein. Investigators noted the presence of these 2 distinct wounds as significant. Examination of the scene did not reveal extensive blood spatter that might typically be associated with such arterial injuries. Detectives reviewed the twins' electronic devices, searching for any indication of conflict or discord between them. No evidence of interpersonal problems was discovered. Benjamin was charged with first-degree murder. He was placed on suicide watch following his arrest and was subsequently released on bail. His parents met him when he was released from custody. They described him as appearing disoriented and providing only single-word answers during the drive home. In April 2023, approximately a year and a half after Megan's death, a grand jury returned an indictment against Benjamin Elliott for first-degree murder. The case proceeded toward trial. Defense attorneys Carrie Hart and Wes Rucker retained Dr. Gerald Simmons, a neurologist and sleep disorder specialist, to evaluate Benjamin. Dr. Simmons initially approached the case with skepticism, but conducted comprehensive assessments, including interviews and 2 sleep studies, in which Benjamin was monitored with devices tracking movement and sleep patterns. Dr. Simmons determined that Benjamin entered slow-wave sleep rapidly, a condition associated with sleepwalking episodes. His findings supported the conclusion that the incident could have occurred during a parasomnia event. The trial began on February 18, 2025 in Harris County. Here's to prosecutors. Megan Long and Maroon Kutani presented the state's case. They acknowledged the absence of any discoverable motive or evidence of problems between the twins. However, they argued that cell phone data contradicted the sleepwalking explanation. The prosecution presented evidence showing that Benjamin's phone had been actively used in the period leading up to the incident, that he had been alert enough to turn off his school alarm, and that the phone's location tracking recorded his movement to Megan's room and back to his own room. Prosecutors also suggested that the pillow placed on Megan's neck was intended to muffle sounds rather than stop bleeding, pointing to Benjamin's whispered tone during the 911 call and noting that his father testified it was the 911 operator's voice that woke him, not any sounds from Benjamin. The defense presented testimony from family members, friends, and sleep experts. Elizabeth Elliott testified about Benjamin's supportive relationship with Megan and the family history of sleepwalking. Anand Kumar Singh, a friend, recounted the slumber party incident involving the donut. Dr. Simmons testified about his findings regarding Benjamin's sleep patterns and the possibility of automatic behaviors during parasomnia episodes. Both parents testified, with Michael Elliott breaking down while describing finding Megan. Kathy Elliott emphasized the close bond between the twins. The parents pleaded for leniency during proceedings. The jury deliberated for approximately 5 hours before returning a verdict on February 24, 2025. Benjamin Elliott was found guilty of murder. The sentencing phase was handled by Judge Danilo Lacayo, and the judge noted that the jury had requested leniency in their deliberations. He considered factors including Benjamin's lack of criminal history and his compliance with conditions while released on bond. Under Texas law, murder carries a punishment range of 5 to 99 years in prison. On February 25, 2025, Judge Lacayo sentenced Benjamin Elliott to 15 years in prison. The sentence was significantly below the 40 years requested by the prosecution. Benjamin became eligible for parole after serving half of his sentence, with parole eligibility occurring in August 2032. Benjamin, now 21 years old, maintains that the verdict represents a miscarriage of justice and continues to assert that he was not guilty of intentionally murdering his sister. His parents expressed frustration with statements made by prosecutors during closing arguments. The case generated extensive media coverage, including examination by news programs and documentaries. The digital tracking data that initially flagged the inconsistency between device activity patterns and Benjamin's account remained a central element in the prosecution's successful argument that the fatal stabbing occurred while Benjamin was fully conscious. Number 7. Fatiha Marzan. On September 26, 2022, emergency dispatch systems in Orange County, Florida received a 911 call at 7:32 in the evening from a residential address on Southern Charm Drive. The caller reported an incident that had occurred approximately 15 hours earlier, in creating an extended time gap that immediately raised questions among responding deputies about what had transpired during that interval. Fatiha Marzan was 21 years old in the fall of 2022. She lived with her family in the Azalea Park neighborhood of eastern Orlando. The household included multiple siblings and followed religious practices that involved evening prayer sessions. Fatiha shared a bedroom with her younger sister, Saima Marzan, who was 20 years old. Due to the size of the bedroom, the sisters shared not only the room but also the same bed. This close proximity meant each could observe the other's activities with minimal privacy. Fatiha had been in a long-distance relationship for approximately 5 years with an individual whose identity was not disclosed in public records. The relationship was conducted primarily through digital communication. Both Fatiha and Saima played an online multiplayer video game called Valorant, which featured a messaging function that allowed players to communicate with one another. Witnesses who knew the family indicated that Fatiha had grown increasingly concerned about interactions between Saima and her boyfriend. Multiple individuals confirmed that tensions had developed within the household regarding these communications. In early September 2022, Fatiha became aware that her boyfriend had been exchanging messages with Saima through the Valorant chat system. The content of these messages indicated a level of familiarity that Fatiha perceived as inappropriate. Fatiha later stated that she discovered her boyfriend had told Saima that he loved her. When this discovery reportedly occurred after Fatiha had already suspected flirtatious communication between the two, Fatiha confronted both Saima and her boyfriend on multiple occasions about the nature of their interactions. According to statements Fatiha provided to investigators, these confrontations did not result in changes to the behavior she found objectionable. Approximately 2 weeks before September 26th, Fatiha made a purchase through an online retailer. She ordered a dagger-style knife set from Amazon. Upon receiving the package, she concealed the knives in her closet and, according to later statements, in a backpack. During this 2-week period, Fatiha reportedly considered when and how she would act on her plan. When the early morning hours of September 26th followed an evening during which the family had engaged in extended prayer sessions, consistent with their religious practice. Fatiha was aware that family members typically remained awake late into the night for these activities. She waited until she determined that other members of the household had gone to sleep. At approximately 4:30 in the morning, while Saima was lying in the bed they shared, Fatiha retrieved one of the daggers from its concealment location. What followed occurred in the bedroom with other family members elsewhere in the residence. Saima sustained injuries to her chest area during this time. According to accounts Fatiha later provided, Saima awoke during the incident and verbalized responses indicating awareness of what was happening. But the attack continued despite Saima's reactions. Following the incident, an extended period elapsed during which no emergency services were contacted. Fatiha remained in the residence during these hours. At some point during the day, Fatiha spoke with another sibling about her mental state. This sibling reportedly engaged Fatiha in conversation that discouraged self-harm. At 7:32 in the evening, more than 15 hours after the morning incident, Fatiha placed a call to 911. She identified herself to the dispatcher and reported that she had stabbed her sister at approximately 4:30 that morning. She stated that she did not believe her sister was still alive. Orange County Sheriff's Office deputies from the Sector 2 Patrol Unit were dispatched to the Southern Charm Drive residence. Emergency medical personnel accompanied the responding officers. Upon arrival, first responders located Saima Marzan in the bedroom she had shared with Fatiha. Saima had sustained multiple penetrating wounds to her chest, specifically in the region of her heart. Paramedics assessed Saima and determined she had been deceased for an extended period. She was pronounced dead at 7:49 in the evening, 17 minutes after the initial 911 call. Deputies secured the scene and detained Fatiha. She was transported to the police station while detectives began processing the residents and conducting witness interviews. Investigators recovered the dagger-style knife that had been used. The weapon matched the description of items from the set Fatiha had purchased from Amazon. During interviews with investigators, Fatiha provided detailed accounts of her planning process and the events of September 26th. She explained her awareness that her family's prayer schedule meant she needed to wait until everyone was asleep. She described her decision-making process regarding the timing of the attack. When questioned about Saima's response during the incident, Fatiha made a statement indicating that Saima had been moving too much. Investigators documented these statements as part of the arrest affidavit. Multiple witnesses were interviewed who corroborated that Fatiha had expressed frustration and anger about Saima's interactions with her boyfriend. The witness accounts supported the conclusion that Fatiha had perceived Saima as attempting to interfere with or claim her romantic relationship. An examination of electronic communications through the Valorant gaming platform confirmed that messages had been exchanged between Saima and Fatiha's boyfriend. Fatiha Marzan was arrested on September 27, 2022, and charged with first-degree murder with a weapon, a capital offense under Florida law. She was booked into the Orange County Corrections Department and held without bond. An arrest affidavit prepared by the Orange County Sheriff's Office detailed the premeditated nature of the alleged offense. The document stated that Fatiha consciously decided to kill her sister, and that the decision was present in her mind at the time of the killing. Fatiha entered a plea of not guilty to the charges. The case was assigned to Judge Barbara J. Leach in the Orange County Circuit Court. Legal proceedings moved forward through the Florida court system. Due to the nature of the charge as a capital offense, the case required extensive pretrial procedures. Court records indicated that the case remained active through 2023 and into 2024. The 15-hour delay between the incident and the emergency call continued to be a focal point in understanding the sequence of events and Fatiha's state of mind during that extended period. Number 8. Gyasi Sibling. Southfield Police Department officers responding to a shooting call at the 12 North Apartments on January 3, 2021 received conflicting narratives within minutes of arrival. The individual who made contact with first responders provided an account describing an attempted robbery and an intruder. Yet two witnesses present in the residence immediately offered statements that contradicted this version of events entirely. Gyasi Arnez Sibling was 20 years old in early 2021. He lived at the 12 North Apartments, a residential complex located on 12 Mile Road in Southfield, Michigan, positioned between Northwestern Highway and Telegraph Road. The apartment housed multiple family members, including Gyasi's younger sister, Bailey Singleton, who was 8 years old. Bailey attended elementary school and participated in activities typical for children her age. The siblings shared the apartment space, along with other relatives who were present on a regular basis. Neighbors and those familiar with the household had occasional interactions with family members, but did not report concerns to authorities prior to January 2021. Gyasi had reached young adulthood and was navigating the responsibilities and challenges associated with that life stage. The living arrangement placed multiple generations in proximity within the apartment unit, creating a dynamic that required negotiation of shared spaces and household expectations. January 3, 2021 was a Sunday. During the evening hours, family members were present in the apartment. Bailey was in the living room area. At some point during the evening, an interaction occurred between Gyasi and Bailey. The nature of the interaction involved verbal exchange. Bailey reportedly engaged in behavior that Gyasi perceived as disrespectful or challenging. Specifically, accounts later indicated that Bailey was talking back to her older brother. The exchange escalated. Gyasi retrieved a firearm from within the residence. When the weapon was discharged in the living room, Bailey sustained a gunshot wound to her head. The injury was immediately life-threatening. Emergency services received notification of the shooting and dispatched units to the 12 North Apartments. Officers from the Southfield Police Department arrived at the scene within 3 minutes of the call. Upon entry, they encountered Gyasi and other family members. Bailey was located in the living room with a critical head injury. Paramedics provided emergency medical treatment and transported her to a nearby hospital. She was admitted in critical condition. Police Chief Elvin Barron later described the emotional impact the scene had on responding officers, noting the difficulty of maintaining professional composure when confronted with an 8-year-old victim. When during initial contact with law enforcement, Gyasi provided a statement about the circumstances surrounding the shooting. He told officers that there had been an attempted robbery at the residence. According to this account, an intruder had entered the apartment and Bailey had been shot during this break-in attempt. Detectives noted that Gyasi was uncooperative during questioning and that his demeanor raised concerns. However, two witnesses who had been present in the apartment during the incident spoke with investigators separately. Their statements contradicted Gyasi's robbery narrative. The witnesses provided accounts indicating that no intruder had been present and that the shooting had occurred during a domestic dispute within the family. Investigators processed the scene and searched for the firearm used in the shooting, and the weapon was not immediately located. Further investigation revealed that Gyasi had attempted to conceal or dispose of the gun following the incident. Officers eventually recovered the firearm. Ballistic analysis confirmed it was the weapon that had fired the round that struck Bailey. Bailey remained hospitalized for several days following the shooting. Medical personnel provided treatment for the head wound, but the severity of the injury presented significant challenges. On January 6, 2021, 3 days after the shooting, Bailey Singleton succumbed to her injuries and was pronounced deceased. The medical examiner's determination regarding cause of death confirmed that the gunshot wound to the head was fatal. With Bailey's death, the investigation transitioned from assault to homicide. Agyasi Arnaz Sibling was formally arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He was also charged with felony firearm possession. He was taken into custody and transported to Oakland County Jail. Bond was denied, and Gyasi remained incarcerated pending trial. The case proceeded through the Oakland County court system over the subsequent years. Legal proceedings involved pre-trial motions, evidence review, and preparation by both prosecution and defense teams. The trial took place in April 2025. Prosecutors from the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office presented evidence including witness testimony from the two individuals who had been in the apartment during the shooting. These witnesses recounted the verbal exchange between Gyasi and Bailey and described the events that followed. The prosecution introduced forensic evidence, including the recovered firearm and ballistic analysis, linking it to Bailey's injury. They also presented Gyasi's initial false statement to police about the robbery, arguing that this demonstrated consciousness of guilt and an attempt to evade responsibility. Medical testimony detailed the nature of Bailey's injury and the trajectory that led to her death. Defense attorneys faced the challenge of addressing the overwhelming physical evidence and witness accounts. The jury heard evidence over multiple days. On April 16, 2025, after deliberations, the jury returned a verdict finding Gyasi Sibling guilty of first-degree murder. The conviction also included the felony firearm charge. Sentencing was scheduled for May 27, 2025. Under Michigan law, first-degree murder carries a potential sentence of life imprisonment. Oakland County Circuit Court conducted the sentencing hearing. Prosecutors argued for a lengthy sentence reflecting the severity of taking the life of an 8-year-old child over what was described as the slightest of disagreements. Oakland County Prosecutor Karen McDonald addressed the court and media, stating that Bailey Singleton should still be present and that her murder represented a tragedy for her family. McDonald emphasized that it was unconscionable for anyone, particularly a child, to be killed by a relative in their own home over a minor verbal dispute. She characterized the case as a stark reminder of gun violence as a public health crisis, capable of ending lives instantly. When the court imposed a sentence of 40 to 60 years in prison for the first-degree murder conviction. An additional 2 years was added for the felony firearm charge. Gyasi Sibling, now 24 years old, was remanded to the custody of the Michigan Department of Corrections to begin serving his sentence. The conflicting witness statements that had immediately alerted responding officers to inconsistencies in the reported robbery scenario had provided the foundation for an investigation that ultimately established the domestic nature of the fatal shooting. Number 9. Yereli Solorio Rivera. A 911 call placed from a residence on South Fruit Avenue in southwest Fresno on the morning of September 24, 2022, originated from a family member who reported hearing gunshots inside a bedroom. Like when responding officers cross-referenced the caller's identity with subsequent witness statements, they identified a discrepancy that would reshape the entire investigation. Yereli Solorio Rivera was 22 years old in the fall of 2022. She lived in Fresno, California, with extended family members including her younger sister, Yaneli Solorio Rivera, who was 18 years old. Yaneli had recently given birth to her first child, a daughter named Celine Solorio Rivera, who was 3 weeks old in late September. The family resided in a home located in a residential area near Fruit and Jensen Avenues. Yareli had been in a relationship with Martin Arroyo Morales, who was 26 years old and had been identified by law enforcement as a validated gang member. Family members and friends who knew both sisters later indicated that tensions had existed between them, though the precise nature of these conflicts would become a subject of competing narratives. Yaneli cared for her newborn daughter and shared living space with multiple family members in the household. Yareli had children of her own from a previous relationship. The sisters had grown up together in Fresno and maintained contact through their shared residence. The early morning hours of September 24th unfolded while most family members remained asleep. At approximately 7:20 in the morning, gunshots were discharged within a bedroom in the residence. Multiple rounds were fired from a 9mm Smith & Wesson handgun. Yaneli, who was lying in bed, sustained gunshot wounds to her upper body. Celine, who was in her mother's arms at the time, also sustained gunshot wounds. The discharge of multiple rounds in rapid succession created noise that alerted other occupants of the home. A 911 call was placed reporting gunshots heard within the bedroom. Emergency services and Fresno Police Department officers were dispatched to the 2500 block of South Fruit Avenue. Officers arrived at the scene and made contact with several family members who were outside the residence. They entered the bedroom where Yaneli and Celine had been located. Both were found unresponsive with gunshot wounds. Emergency medical personnel assessed the victims and determined that both had succumbed to their injuries. They were pronounced deceased at the scene. The positioning of the victims indicated that Yaneli had been holding Celine when the shooting occurred. Fresno Police Chief Paco Balderrama later described the scene as traumatic for all responding officers, detectives, emergency medical services personnel, and crime scene technicians who processed the location. Homicide detectives from the Fresno Police Department initiated an investigation. Initial interviews with family members provided varying accounts of events leading up to the shooting. Yareli, who had placed the 911 call, was among those interviewed. During questioning, she provided information about potential suspects and offered explanations for the incident. Investigators noted inconsistencies in her statements. She claimed to have been with a friend the night before the shooting, but cell phone records subsequently revealed she had been with Martin Arroyo Morales during that time period. This discrepancy raised immediate concerns among detectives. A family member who was present in the home provided a statement to police indicating they had observed Arroyo Morales running from the garage area with a firearm immediately after the gunshots were heard. This witness account contradicted the narrative that an unknown intruder had been responsible. Investigators secured surveillance video from a business near the residence. The footage captured an individual walking in the area around the home during the time frame of the murders. Analysis of the video led to positive identification of the person as Martin Arroyo Morales. This evidence became central to unraveling the sequence of events. A search was conducted of an orchard area surrounding the home with assistance from the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, on firearms and explosives. Authorities offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to a conviction in the case. Tips from the community combined with forensic evidence began to build a comprehensive picture. On November 9, 2022, Yareli Solorio Rivera and Martin Arroyo Morales were taken into custody in Fresno. During subsequent interviews, both initially denied involvement in the murders. Under continued questioning, their accounts shifted. They eventually confessed to their roles in the double homicide and led detectives to the location where the murder weapon had been concealed. The 9mm Smith & Wesson handgun was recovered. The Fresno County District Attorney's Office filed charges against both defendants on November 14, 2022. Yareli Solorio Rivera was charged with 2 counts of murder and the special circumstance of multiple murders. She also faced 2 enhancements for personal and intentional discharge of a firearm causing death. Martin Arroyo Morales was charged with 2 counts of murder and the special circumstance of multiple murders. The special circumstances designation meant both defendants faced potential sentences of life in prison without possibility of parole or the death penalty. They were booked into Fresno County Jail and held on $2 million bail each. Arraignment took place on November 15, 2022. Chief Balderrama stated during press conferences that investigators had determined the motive to be jealousy and sibling rivalry. He noted that both suspects had shown no remorse, no guilt, and no apprehension during their confessions, describing their demeanor as unlike anything he had encountered in his career. In October 2023, the District Attorney's Office announced it would seek the death penalty against Yareli Solorio Rivera, but not against Arroyo Morales. Legal proceedings continued through 2024 and into 2025. During this time, plea negotiations took place between defense attorneys and prosecutors. Yareli's defense team introduced claims that Yaneli had threatened Yareli's children, asserting this created fear that pushed Yareli to act. Defense attorney Curtis Sock later argued that the act was committed out of concern for the safety of Yareli's children. Prosecutors maintained that the evidence supported premeditated murder driven by jealousy toward Yaneli and the newborn. Court documents indicated that Yareli and Arroyo Morales had agreed to commit the murders together, and that Yareli had discharged the firearm multiple times while her sister and niece slept. In October 2025, both defendants appeared before Fresno County Superior Court Judge Brian Alvarez for sentencing. Yareli Solorio Rivera had entered into a plea agreement with prosecutors in which she changed her plea from not guilty to no contest in exchange for removal of the death penalty. Judge Alvarez sentenced her to 2 consecutive life terms in prison without possibility of parole. Martin Arroyo Morales had reached a separate plea agreement that resulted in dismissal of the murder charges. He pleaded to 2 counts of voluntary manslaughter and received 2 11-year sentences, totaling 22 years. During the sentencing hearing, the father of both Yaneli and Yareli, Marcelino Solorio Zaragoza, addressed the court. He pleaded with Judge Alvarez that Arroyo Morales should receive the longer sentence, stating that Arroyo Morales was the one truly guilty, and expressing his anguish at losing one daughter and potentially losing another. Judge Alvarez acknowledged the father's pain but explained that the court was bound by the plea agreements reached with the state. He stated that Ureli would never be eligible for parole and would die in prison, and that she had avoided a potential death penalty through her negotiated plea. Ureli Solorio Rivera, now 25 years old, was remanded to the custody of the California Department of Corrections to begin serving her life sentences. Martin Arroyo Morales began serving his 22-year sentence. In the initial 911 call that had appeared to be a report of a crime in progress, had been placed by the individual who prosecutors determined had orchestrated and executed the fatal shooting of her own sister and infant niece. Number 10. David Brom. On the morning of February 18, 1988, a student at Lourdes High School in Rochester, Minnesota, reported to investigators that a classmate had approached her before school began and provided unprompted details about killing 4 family members during the early morning hours. The account was specific enough that officers treating the report as potentially credible rather than dismissing it as adolescent exaggeration or attention-seeking behavior. David Francis Brom was 16 years old in early 1988. He lived with his family in a residence in northwest Rochester. His father, Bernard Brom, was 43 years old and worked to provide for the household. His mother, Paulette Brom, was 42 years old and maintained the home. David had 3 siblings. His older brother, Joe, had been asked to leave the household approximately 2 years prior, reportedly due to conflicts with their parents. David's younger sister, Diane, was 13 years old and attended local schools. His youngest brother, Richard, known as Rick, was 11 years old. The family home required wood heating, and multiple friends of David later told investigators that his parents frequently required him to chop wood for this purpose. David attended John Marshall High School and maintained friendships with students from both his school and other Rochester schools, including Lourdes High School. Their friends who knew David described him as someone who confided in them about tensions within his household. Some stated that David spoke about alleged abuse occurring in the home, though the nature and extent of these claims varied across witness accounts. David had expressed interest in heavy metal music, which became a source of disagreement with his father. David also worked at a local restaurant alongside his brother Joe. To Joe, David appeared to function normally and did not frequently discuss home life. A school counselor had information suggesting the family might have been participating in family counseling sessions. David had discussed with 2 friends a fantasy scenario involving leaving Rochester, traveling to Florida using money taken from his parents, and ultimately taking their own lives when funds were depleted. Many of these friends considered the discussions to be jokes and did not take them seriously or report them to adults. The evening of February 17, 1988, progressed routinely until approximately 11:30 at night. At that time, David and his father, Bernard, engaged in an argument. The dispute centered on David's listening to heavy metal music. The disagreement occurred in a common area of the home and involved raised voices. After the confrontation concluded, family members retired to their respective bedrooms. David did not go to sleep. He remained awake for several hours following the argument. At approximately 3 o'clock in the morning on February 18th, David retrieved an axe from within the residence. He proceeded to the second floor where the bedrooms were located. He entered his parents' bedroom first, where Bernard was struck multiple times with the axe while in bed. The impacts created gash wounds to his head and upper body. Bernard attempted to rise during the attack but was struck repeatedly. Paulette was also attacked in the bedroom. David then moved to other bedrooms on the second floor. He entered the room where Rick was sleeping and struck him with the axe. He proceeded to Diane's room and attacked her as well. All 4 family members sustained numerous gash wounds to their heads and upper bodies from the axe. The attacks were conducted methodically as David moved from room to room. After completing the attacks, David placed the blood-stained axe in the basement of the residence. The axe handle retained his palm and fingerprints. Later on the morning of February 18th, David went to Lourdes High School, where he located one of his friends and convinced her to skip school with him. During their time together, David provided her with detailed descriptions of what had occurred during the early morning hours. He explained that he had struck his father with the axe and that his father kept getting up, despite being hit repeatedly. He described going to his mother's room and then to his brother's room. The friend listened to these accounts. David and this friend traveled to various locations around Rochester, including a grocery store, a park, and the friend's residence. David also met with a group of friends from John Marshall High School for lunch at Godfather's Pizza. During these hours, no one at the Brahm residence contacted authorities about the family's status. In the early evening of February 18th, Olmsted County Sheriff's Department received a request for a welfare check at the Brahm family home. The request came after a friend of David's contacted police to report that David had called him and stated he had killed his family. Deputies were dispatched to the residence. They approached the home and entered through an unlocked garage door. Upon ascending the stairs to the second floor, deputies observed 2 sets of feet at the top of the staircase. They discovered the bodies of all 4 family members on the second floor. Paulette, Bernard, Diane, and Richard Brahm were all deceased. The scene was immediately secured and homicide investigators were summoned. Law enforcement personnel processed the residence. The blood-stained axe was located in the basement and collected as evidence. A forensic testing confirmed the axe had been used to kill all 4 victims. Analysis of the axe handle revealed David's palm and fingerprints. Investigators initiated a search for David Brahm, who was not present at the residence. Initially, there was concern that David might have been abducted or harmed. However, the report from the friend who had spent the day with David provided investigators with critical information. She was interviewed and provided testimony about David's detailed confession to her that morning. More than 50 interviews were conducted during the investigation. Friends shared information about David's statements regarding his parents making him chop wood and his complaints about treatment in the home. Items suggesting an attempted departure were discovered. In a culvert near the residence, Morris investigators found a cash card belonging to David's parents, a toothbrush, a comb, cans of soda, and candy. Similar items were found in a van that David had apparently planned to use to drive to Florida. On February 19th, 1988, Rochester police officers located David Brahm using a payphone near the local post office. He was taken into custody without incident. During transport to the law enforcement center, deputies informed David they had questions. He responded by saying they could proceed. However, when formal questioning began, David requested an attorney after approximately 3 minutes. The interview was terminated. During custody, jail monitors observed David's behavior. They noted he appeared normal in his interactions, discussing topics such as cars and friends. He slept through nights and watched television programs, including the Oprah Winfrey Show. These observations led monitors to conclude David appeared mentally stable. David Francis Brom was initially referred to the juvenile court system because he was 16 years old at the time of the offenses. However, due to the severity of the crimes, the case was transferred to the adult judicial system. David entered a plea of not guilty by reason of mental illness or insanity. The defense strategy centered on establishing that David had been legally insane at the time he killed his family members. The trial involved extensive psychiatric testimony. 4 psychiatrists testified for the prosecution. 2 of these experts determined that David was not legally insane at the time of the crimes. When the defense presented a psychiatrist who concluded that David did not understand that killing his parents and siblings was wrong, all psychiatrists agreed that David suffered from some form of mental health issues, though they disagreed on whether these issues met the legal standard for insanity under Minnesota's use of the Monotone rules. The trial received significant media attention both locally and nationally. Prosecutors presented evidence, including David's statements to his friend, detailing how he killed each family member, the forensic evidence linking him to the murder weapon, and the timeline of events. The trial proceeded through 1989. On October 16, 1989, a jury returned a verdict finding David Brom guilty of first-degree murder on all counts. The jury rejected the insanity defense. Judge Ancy Morse conducted the sentencing hearing. David faced 4 counts of first-degree murder. Judge Morse imposed 3 consecutive life terms and 1 concurrent life term. The consecutive nature of 3 of the sentences meant David would need to serve a minimum of 52 years and 6 months before becoming eligible for parole consideration. Under this sentence structure, David would not have been eligible for parole until 2037. He was transferred to Minnesota correctional facilities to begin serving his sentence. Over the following decades, David remained incarcerated. Institutional records indicated he maintained behavior consistent with being classified as a model prisoner, with no serious incidents during his more than 3 decades of incarceration. In 2012, whereas the United States Supreme Court issued a ruling that states could no longer impose mandatory life without parole sentences for juvenile offenders. This decision prompted legislative action in multiple states. Minnesota passed legislation in 2023 as part of the Public Safety Budget Bill that banned juvenile life without parole sentences entirely. The law allowed juvenile offenders sentenced to life to become fully eligible for parole after serving 15 years behind bars. David Brom became eligible for parole retroactively as of 2018 under this new law. In January 2025, David appeared before the parole board seeking regular parole release. During this hearing, he admitted that his mental health had played a role in his decision to murder his family members. This acknowledgement addressed a question that had persisted for years. Would the parole board deny his request for regular parole? However, the Minnesota Department of Corrections initiated the process for work release. On July 29, 2025, after serving more than 37 years in prison, David Brom was released to a work release program at a Twin Cities halfway house. He remained under supervision and was subject to GPS monitoring. The release generated significant reaction in Rochester. Former Olmsted County Attorney Mark Ostrom, who had been involved in the original case, expressed concern that convicted murderers were not serving their full sentences as determined by judges. Current Olmsted County Sheriff Kevin Torgerson, who had been one of the first responding deputies to discover the bodies in 1988, stated that while he could not stop what was already in motion, the public must trust the parole board's decision and hope David was ready for the transition. The Minnesota Department of Corrections indicated that David's chances of reoffending were assessed as low and that he would receive mental health support in the community. The unexpected witness report from the student at Lourdes High School on the morning of February 18, 1988, had provided the critical break that identified David as the perpetrator and allowed investigators to focus their efforts on locating him rather than pursuing unknown suspects.